Catherine Grace Harrison had built her reputation brick by brick, deal by deal, in the relentless world of finance. In downtown Boston, where glass towers pierced the skyline and the river carried echoes of ambition, people called her the Iron Lady of Numbers. She was precise, commanding, and untouchable. Every contract she touched turned into profit. Every boardroom she entered bent to her logic. But that Wednesday night, something unusual happened. The investor dinner in Manhattan wrapped up earlier than expected. Instead of staying for cocktails at a fashionable Soho lounge, Catherine told her driver to head straight home, an immaculate colonial-style house tucked inside a gated community on the outskirts of the city. The digital clock on the dashboard read 8:15 p.m. when the black Lincoln Navigator turned into her driveway. Catherine leaned back, exhausted but strangely restless. She hadn't seen her house at this hour in months. Most nights she returned well past 10, when the neighborhood was dark, the kitchen cold, and her son already asleep. Dinner at home had become a luxury she didn't even allow herself to dream about. She pushed open the front door with her key card. Immediately, something struck her, the faint scent of bleach mixed with toasted bread. Odd. By this hour, the cleaning staff should have been long gone, and silence was usually the only thing filling the cavernous rooms. She slipped off her linen blazer, hung it on the polished oak rack, and froze. A soft murmur carried through the hallway. From the living room, her heels clicked against the hardwood floor as she moved forward, each step sharp and quiet. When she peeked inside, the sight rooted her to the spot. There he was, Ethan, her 4-year-old son, blonde hair tousled, braces strapped around his fragile legs, purple crutches leaning against the couch. He held a damp towel, scrubbing the floor with clumsy determination. Beside him, kneeling on the rug, was Daniel Walker, the man she had hired 6 months earlier to manage household chores. "Look, Dad, I can do it too." Ethan's bright voice rang with joy, his cheeks flushed with effort. Daniel, early 40s, weathered face, calm gray eyes, smiled gently. He wore a plain cotton t-shirt and faded jeans, hands rough from scrubbing floors. "Easy, champ. You've already done plenty. Sit down a minute. I don't want you overdoing it." Ethan shook his head, wobbling as he steadied himself. "No, you always say we're a team, and teams don't quit." The words pierced Catherine's chest like an arrow. She couldn't remember the last time she'd seen her son so radiant, so alive. Ethan looked up and spotted her in the doorway. His blue eyes widened. "Mom, you're home early." He stumbled forward, nearly losing balance. Daniel's steady hands caught him before he hit the floor. Catherine blinked, her corporate armor momentarily slipping. The scene was so unexpected, so intimate, that her polished phrases deserted her. "Good evening, Ms. Harrison," Daniel said quietly, standing up, towel in hand. "I didn't expect you back so soon." He lowered his gaze, clearly uneasy. His palms were red from scrubbing. Catherine forced her expression into something cool, detached, though inside her mind raced with a storm of questions. "Ethan, what are you doing with that rag?" she asked, her voice smoother than she felt. "Helping Daniel. And today I stood up almost 5 minutes without my crutches." Ethan's grin overflowed with pride. "Daniel teaches me exercises every day. He says if I practice, one day I'll run like the other kids." Silence. Thick, disorienting silence. Catherine's eyes darted from her son to Daniel. Anger, disbelief, and an unwelcome flicker of gratitude tangled inside her. Exercises. Her voice was low, steady. Daniel swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to cross any boundaries. I just thought I could help." Ethan stepped between them, tiny shoulders square with courage. "Mom, don't be mad. Daniel's the best. He doesn't give up on me when it hurts. He says I'm strong, like a warrior." The words hit Catherine like a gut punch. When was the last time she had heard her son speak with such fire? When was the last time she spent more than 5 distracted minutes with him? Her eyes glued to a glowing phone screen. "Ethan, go upstairs for a moment," she managed, voice tight. "But Mom." "Now, sweetheart." He hesitated, glanced at Daniel, who gave a reassuring nod. "Go ahead, champ. Everything's fine." Dragging his crutches, Ethan slowly climbed the staircase. Before disappearing, he called out, "Daniel is the best person in the whole world." The words lingered in the air long after his small footsteps faded. Catherine turned back to Daniel, her composure cracking, her voice firm. Since when have you been doing exercises with my son?" "Since I started here. About 6 months." He met her eyes, calm but nervous. "Always on my break, or after I finish chores. Never on your time. And I swear, I never neglected the house. Her lips pressed into a thin line. And you're not charging for this? No. His gaze was steady, raw, disarming. I don't do it for money. I do it because Ethan's a special kid. Special? Daniel's face softened, his voice warm. He's brave, Miss Harrison. Even when it hurts, he pushes forward. He notices when I'm tired and asks if I'm okay. He's got a huge heart. The adjectives rolled in her mind: brave, luminous, generous. Words she had never bothered to attach to her son. Words spoken not by a doctor in a white coat, but by a man with callous hands and a quiet soul. And how do you even know what to do with him? Daniel hesitated, voice dropping. My daughter, Lily, was born with leg problems. I spent years at rehab centers with her, learning from therapists. She's better now, but everything I know, I learned for her. For the first time in years, Catherine felt a pang of admiration and guilt. This man, a single father with fewer resources than she could ever imagine, had poured his life into helping his child. And now, he was given the same devotion to Ethan, without asking for anything in return. What about Gabrielle? Catherine asked suddenly, naming the previous nanny. She usually goes out with friends. I stay with Ethan. We have dinner, do his bath, run the exercises, then I clean up. Catherine scanned the room. The place was spotless, glowing with warmth. Her son, meanwhile, seemed happier than she'd seen him in years. A hollow ache gnawed at her stomach. She had convinced herself she gave Ethan everything: prestigious schools, top doctors, a luxurious home. But here was a man with rough hands and tired eyes giving him what she never had: time, companionship, hope. If you want me to stop, I will, Daniel said, voice cautious. I never meant to offend or cross lines. For a moment, Catherine wanted to unleash her authority, to remind him who owned the house, the money, the rules. But another part of her, a quieter, more human part, whispered something different. She drew in a deep breath, her voice cracking for the first time in years. No, don't stop. Daniel blinked. Excuse me? Tomorrow. Catherine swallowed hard. Tomorrow I want to see it with my own eyes. The exercises. I want to be there. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with unspoken promises. Catherine felt something inside her shift. Like a fortress wall she'd spent years building was finally beginning to crumble. Maybe, just maybe, coming home early that night hadn't just revealed a secret. It had opened the door to learning how to be a mother again. The night after she discovered Daniel working with Ethan, Catherine didn't sleep. She tossed in the expensive California king bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the scene in the living room. Ethan's flushed cheeks, his fragile body trembling with determination, the luminous joy in his eyes. And Daniel, steady, patient, almost fatherly, kneeling beside him as if the world had shrunk to just that boy and his fight. Catherine had negotiated billion-dollar deals without flinching, yet the memory of her son balancing on his weak legs made her heart pound with raw, unshakable guilt. At dawn, when the rest of the neighborhood still slumbered, she stood in her closet. Instead of slipping into her usual tailored blazer and heels, she pulled on a pair of soft jeans and a white linen blouse. Simple, unpretentious. When she looked in the mirror, she almost didn't recognize herself. She looked less like a CEO and more like a mother. Downstairs, the warm aroma of coffee and something sweet drifted from the kitchen. She followed the smell and stopped short. Daniel was at the stove, flipping pancakes with casual grace, steam curling from a silver kettle. He turned surprised. Good morning, Ms. Harrison. Didn't think I'd see you this early. Good morning, she replied, her voice softer than intended. Do you always get up this early? Daniel gave a small shrug, half smile tugging his lips. Early mornings are kind of second nature. Single dads don't exactly get to hit the snooze button. The words, humble yet resilient, lingered. Catherine stood there longer than necessary, watching the ordinary domestic scene unfold. Pancakes, black coffee, a quiet man who radiated calm strength. It was such a stark contrast to her sterile boardrooms filled with sharp suits and sharper tongues. Where's Ethan? She asked. Still asleep. But the second he smells these pancakes, he'll come flying down the stairs. Mondays are his 2 pancake days. He says they give him energy for training. Catherine blinked. She didn't even know her son had such a ritual. As if on cue, small footsteps thundered across the hall. Ethan appeared in his pajamas, hair sticking up like straw. He froze when he saw his mother at the table. "Mom, you're here? You're not going to the office." "Not today," Catherine said gently. "Today I want to watch you train with Daniel." Ethan's eyes widened, glowing. "Really? You'll actually watch?" "Yes, sweetheart. I don't want to miss it." She reached out, smoothing his messy hair. The boy squealed, practically bouncing despite his crutches. This is the best day ever. They ate together, Daniel joking, Ethan giggling. Catherine mostly listening, realizing how much of her son's world she had missed. Little details. The way he preferred honey over syrup, the silly nicknames he and Daniel invented, the inside jokes that flowed like an unspoken language between them. After breakfast, they headed into the backyard. Morning sunlight spilled golden across the grass, the crisp air smelling of dew and cut wood from a neighbor's chimney. Daniel rolled out a yoga mat on the lawn, helping Ethan position himself. "All right, champ, let's start with stretches." Catherine sat on a patio chair, hands clenched in her lap. She forced herself not to intervene, not to control, just to watch. Ethan stretched his fragile legs, biting his lip, determination carved across his small face. "That's it, buddy," Daniel encouraged, his voice steady. "Hold it. 10 seconds. Catherine felt her throat tighten. She had seen her son in sterile therapy rooms, surrounded by specialists and expensive machines, but never like this, never with such luminous determination. Then came balance training. Daniel gently removed the crutches, keeping Ethan upright with feather-light hands. "Remember, fix your eyes on one point. Breathe deep. Trust yourself." Ethan nodded. His voice trembled but was fierce. "Mom, watch me." Catherine shot to her feet. "I'm watching, baby. I'm right here." 1 second. 2. 10. Sweat dotted Ethan's forehead. 15. 20. 30. Daniel counted, his voice electric with pride. Ethan toppled forward into Daniel's arms, laughing breathlessly. "Mom, did you see?" 30 seconds. Catherine rushed to him, hugging him so tight he squealed. "I'm so proud of you, Ethan. So proud." The words poured from her lips, fierce and fragile at the same time. And for the first time, she meant every syllable with her entire being. For the next half hour, Catherine became a spectator of miracles. Daniel coached with patient resilience, celebrating every small victory as though it were Olympic gold. Ethan, luminous with joy, fought through fatigue and pain without a trace of self-pity. And Catherine, who had always measured worth in profits and percentages, discovered a new currency: seconds of balance, steps taken, giggles shared. By the end, Ethan collapsed onto the mat, exhausted but radiant. "Mom, will you come tomorrow too?" Catherine hesitated. Her calendar was filled with back-to-back meetings, calls with investors, deadlines carved in stone. But something inside her had shifted. "Yes, sweetheart, I'll be here tomorrow." Ethan's smile was wide enough to break her heart. When he went upstairs to shower, Catherine turned to Daniel. Her voice wavered. "Thank you, not just for the house. For this, for giving my son something I couldn't." Daniel shook his head modestly. "You don't need to thank me. Honestly, it comes natural. Ethan reminds me of Lily, my daughter. She taught me that the real victories aren't about how much you own, but how hard you keep fighting." "Your daughter," Catherine's tone softened. 9 years old. Lives with my mom back in a modest apartment in Dorchester. I work here to pay her tuition and therapy bills. It's not easy, but we manage." For a long moment, Catherine stared at him, not as her employee, but as a man carrying burdens heavier than she had ever known, yet still giving freely of himself. The rest of the morning passed with quiet normalcy. Catherine worked from her laptop in the living room, the hum of emails and calls blending with the sound of Ethan's footsteps upstairs. But every time she glanced at the window and saw the memory of him standing proudly on grass, she felt less like a CEO and more like a woman rediscovering humanity. By afternoon, her phone buzzed with reminders of upcoming meetings in Manhattan. She opened her calendar, stared at the packed lines of obligations, and for the first time in her life, she clicked cancel. 2 meetings vanished with a single stroke. Her chest loosened. She whispered to herself, I don't care if I lose a contract. What I can't lose again is my son's smile. Tuesday morning broke crisp and bright over the Boston suburbs. Catherine woke before her alarm, an unfamiliar energy buzzing beneath her skin. For years, mornings had meant rushing to scan quarterly reports, checking overnight market numbers, rehearsing her agenda before a board call. But this morning she thought only of Ethan, of his trembling but triumphant 30 seconds on the mat, his luminous face beaming with pride. She pulled her hair into a simple ponytail, slipped into sneakers, and headed downstairs. Daniel was already in the kitchen, methodically squeezing oranges into a pitcher. The steady rhythm of his work reminded her of someone who had lived his whole life on a schedule that wasn't his own. "Morning, Miss Harrison," he greeted politely. "Good morning, Daniel," she replied, pouring herself coffee into a plain white mug. She hesitated, then added, "I canceled some meetings yesterday." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Really?" "Really," she confirmed, meeting his gaze. "I want to be here in the mornings. I don't plan to miss Ethan's progress anymore." Something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement that this was not a small sacrifice for her. His faint smile was steady, grounded, almost tender. "I think Ethan will appreciate that more than you know." As if summoned, the rapid thump of small crutches echoed down the hall. Ethan appeared, still in pajamas, hair sticking up, eyes wide when he saw his mother at the breakfast table again. "Mom, you kept your promise." He flung his arms around her waist, clinging tightly. "Of course, sweetheart," Catherine whispered, hugging him back fiercely. "I'll be here whenever I can." They ate quickly, laughter bubbling over burnt pancakes and sticky syrup. Then it was time for training. Out on the lawn, dew sparkled like glass on the grass, the morning sun warming their faces. Daniel spread the mat, guiding Ethan to sit. "All right, champ. Same routine as yesterday. Let's stretch first." But this time Catherine didn't just sit back. She lowered herself on the mat beside them, her palms pressed against the damp earth. "Can I help?" she asked. Daniel looked surprised, then nodded. "Sure. Just sit by him and count the seconds out loud. It motivates him to hear more than one voice." Catherine smiled nervously. "Okay, I can do that." They started the count together. Ethan's legs shook, his lips pressed tight, but his determination was raw and fierce. Catherine's voice grew louder, steadier with each number. 17, 18, 19, 40. Ethan shouted triumphantly before collapsing against Daniel's waiting arms. The 3 of them burst into laughter, their voices mingling in the crisp air. Ethan turned to her, cheeks flushed. "Mom, if you come every day, I bet I'll make it to a whole minute." Catherine cupped his face, eyes shimmering. "Then I'll come every day, champ." It was so simple, yet so monumental. That afternoon, reality came knocking. In her upstairs office, Catherine opened her laptop to a barrage of emails. Partners demanding explanations for her sudden absences, executives complaining about her lack of commitment. One message accused her of risking a multi-million-dollar deal in Valencia. Her temples throbbed. For years she had been defined by her ferocious reliability, her reputation as the woman who never wavered. And now, because she chose her son, the world was already questioning her. Frustration surged, but then, through the window, she saw them. Daniel and Ethan in the yard, tossing a small foam ball back and forth. Daniel adjusted Ethan's stance, encouraging him to shift weight between fragile legs. Ethan laughed, the sound bright, contagious, unbreakable. Catherine slammed the laptop shut. This is what matters. Not contracts. Not applause. That night, when Ethan was tucked in, Catherine found Daniel in the living room folding blankets. The quiet domesticity of it startled her. So ordinary, yet so precious. "Daniel," she began softly, "can I ask you something?" He straightened, alert. "Of course. Why do you do this? Not just the chores." "Ethan, you treat him like your own." Daniel exhaled slowly, the weight of memory shadowing his features. "Because I know what it feels like to be alone. My daughter, Lily. She taught me that a parent, or any adult, can be the difference between giving up and pushing forward. And Ethan, he's extraordinary. The way he fights, the way he believes. Helping him feels like honoring what Lily taught me. Catherine's throat tightened. She thought of Ethan calling Daniel the best person in the world, and it stung with both gratitude and jealousy. Do you know what Ethan told me yesterday? Daniel asked quietly. That I'm his best friend. The words hit Catherine like a blade. She whispered, almost against her will, and what am I then? Daniel hesitated, then answered gently. You're his mother. That's irreplaceable. But maybe he needs you to be his friend too. The truth in his words was raw, piercing. She had spent so long being CEO, provider, disciplinarian. She had forgotten how to simply be there. In the days that followed, Catherine committed. Each morning, she joined them on the mat, counting, clapping, laughing. Each evening, she rearranged her calendar, carving out space where there had been none. The emails piled up, colleagues whispered, but Ethan thrived. Within a week, he held his balance for over a minute. One Sunday, they ventured to a nearby park. Ethan insisted on trying a short walk without his crutches. Daniel stayed close, steady hands ready, Catherine on the other side. Strangers paused to watch as the boy wobbled forward, determination blazing in his eyes. When Ethan managed 5 steps before collapsing into Daniel's arms, cheers erupted from strangers. Catherine burst into tears, hugging her son tightly. You're my champion, she whispered fiercely. My brave, unstoppable champion. Later that night, Catherine sat at her mahogany desk. She stared at her planner, pages filled with board meetings, flights, conferences. It all seemed cold, sterile, irrelevant. She pulled out a blank sheet of paper and scribbled, New goal, be present. Not just a CEO, a mother, and maybe a friend. She leaned back, breathing deep. For the first time in years, she smiled, not the polished smile of a businesswoman, but the fragile, luminous smile of a mother rediscovering what mattered most. The week after Ethan's triumphant steps at the park felt like stepping into an entirely new rhythm of life. Catherine's house, once so quiet it echoed, now buzzed with laughter, encouragement, and the unpolished sounds of childhood. She had thought her home was perfect before. Immaculate floors, designer furniture, a schedule that ran like clockwork. But now, she realized, perfection had been sterile. What she craved was what she finally had. Life. Every morning began the same way. Coffee brewing, Daniel humming softly in the kitchen, Ethan bounding in with his crutches clacking against the hardwood, eager for pancakes or eggs. And Catherine, once the absent ghost slipping out the door before sunrise, now sat at the table, hair pulled back, hands wrapped around a steaming mug, present in the small but luminous ritual of breakfast. But with the light came shadows. Her phone continued to buzz with impatient messages from partners, hints of frustration from board members. Some executives whispered about her distraction. Others questioned her priorities. Catherine knew the storm was building outside, but each time she saw Ethan balance 1 second longer or take another fragile step, her resolve grew fierce. One crisp Saturday morning, she decided to take a leap of her own. Instead of another training session in the backyard, she announced, Ethan, how about we try somewhere new today? I was thinking the park by the Charles River. His eyes went wide, luminous with excitement. Really? The big park with the ducks. Daniel glanced at her, a mixture of caution and admiration in his gaze. It'll be more challenging than the backyard. Catherine straightened, determination etched into her face. That's the point. So they packed snacks, extra water, and Ethan's favorite hoodie, and drove into Boston. The fall air was cool, leaves drifting in fiery swirls of amber and scarlet. The park was alive with joggers, families, and college students sprawled on blankets. Ethan gripped his crutches tightly as Daniel knelt beside him. Remember, champ, this isn't about anyone else. Just you, one step at a time. I know, Ethan said with a fierce little nod. I want to beat the Ethan from yesterday. Catherine walked beside them, heart in her throat. She tried to ignore the curious glances of strangers, the whispered encouragements or sympathetic smiles. All she saw was her son, fragile, resilient, radiant in his effort, Step, wobble, step, catch. Each movement was raw, unpolished, yet heroic. Catherine counted under her breath, willing him forward. By the time he collapsed onto a bench, Ethan had made it farther than he ever had before. "Did you see, Mom?" he gasped between breaths. "I almost made it to the bridge." She wrapped her arms around him, her voice trembling. "I saw everything, baby. You were incredible." Daniel crouched nearby, smiling quietly, his eyes steady with pride. "That's progress you can't buy. That's heart." The three of them shared sandwiches on the bench, ducks quacking nearby, the city skyline gleaming across the water. Catherine had attended countless power lunches at five-star restaurants, but this simple food, open sky, family, felt more nourishing than any of them. Yet, even as she soaked in the tender moment, Catherine's phone buzzed again. This time, she ignored it, but Daniel noticed her hesitation. "You're still carrying both worlds, aren't you?" he asked gently. She sighed, weary. "I am, but one feels hollow now. I used to think the business was everything. Now, I'm starting to wonder if I've been chasing the wrong kind of success." Daniel's voice was quiet but firm. "Maybe real success is seeing your kids' eyes light up because you're watching." The words sank deep, raw, and poignant. That evening, when they returned home, Catherine checked her inbox. One message stood out: a client threatening to pull out a major contract if she didn't attend a meeting in New York next week. The old Catherine would have booked the flight instantly, sacrificed anything. But now, she stared at the message with something close to defiance. Instead of replying, she closed the laptop and walked to Ethan's room. He was sitting up in bed, sketching in a notebook. "What are you drawing, champ?" "A superhero," Ethan said proudly, holding it up. The figure was shaky but bold, a caped child standing tall. "It's me. But look, Daniel's in it too. He's the one holding me up when I can't stand." Catherine's heart clenched. The drawing was fragile, messy, and luminous in its honesty. "You forgot someone," she said softly. Ethan tilted his head. "Who?" "Me. Your mom. I want to be in your superhero team, too." He grinned, grabbing a crayon. "Okay, you can be the one cheering. You're really loud." She laughed through the tears that blurred her eyes. "That's perfect." The next morning, Catherine made a choice she never would have imagined a month ago. She emailed her executive assistant. "Cancel New York. Delegate to Greg. My priority is here." When she hit send, she felt lighter, as though she'd shed armor she no longer needed. Days flowed with a rhythm that was both fragile and resilient. Ethan trained harder. Daniel coached with unwavering patience, and Catherine, no longer just an observer, counted, clapped, laughed, and sometimes even cried alongside them. One rainy afternoon, they built a blanket fort in the living room. Ethan barked orders like a tiny general. Daniel hauled cushions, and Catherine held up chairs for support. When the fort was complete, Ethan declared, "This is the safest castle in Boston." Catherine laughed until her stomach hurt. She hadn't done that in years. But not everyone celebrated her transformation. At a luncheon in Back Bay, an old friend, Melissa, raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow over a glass of wine. "You've missed 3 major events this month, Catherine, and the papers are whispering. People say you're letting some handyman run your house." Catherine's expression hardened, icy but fierce. "That handyman has done more for my son in 6 months than I did in 6 years. Don't call him that. His name is Daniel." Melissa blinked, stunned by the raw edge in Catherine's voice. She changed the subject, but Catherine didn't miss the judgment that lingered. That night, she replayed the conversation in her mind. For the first time, though, she didn't feel ashamed. She felt strong. Her priorities were shifting, and she wasn't going back. When she tucked Ethan in, he whispered sleepily, "Mom, we're the best team in the world. You, me, and Daniel." She kissed his forehead, her chest aching with tender love. "Yes, baby, the best team." And as she turned out the light, Catherine realized she was no longer living 2 separate lives. She was building one, raw, messy, luminous, and true. The first real chill of November rolled into Boston with sharp winds that rattled the trees outside Catherine's colonial house. Inside, warmth radiated from the kitchen, where the smell of cinnamon and baked apples filled the air. Daniel had surprised Ethan with the promise of a fall feast, complete with his grandmother's pie recipe. Catherine stood in the doorway, watching them. Daniel's sleeves were rolled up, his hands dusted with flour. Ethan balanced on his crutches beside him, fiercely determined to help stir the filling, even though his tiny arms shook from the effort. The scene was tender, domestic, so far from the sterile silence the house had once known. But in the back of her mind, Catherine couldn't quiet the storm. Her phone buzzed on the counter, another impatient email flashing across the screen. Board demands your presence. Investors are concerned. Urgent. She turned it face down, refusing to let the world outside intrude. At least, not yet. Mom! Ethan shouted, nearly tipping the mixing bowl in his excitement. Taste this. Daniel says it's perfect. She leaned down, tasting a spoonful of sweet, warm apple filling. Her eyes widened. Oh my goodness. That's better than anything I've had at the Ritz. Daniel chuckled. Don't let the Ritz hear you say that. Ethan beamed, proud. We make the best team. The word sank into Catherine's chest. Team. Once upon a time, her definition of teamwork had been cold negotiations and high-rise contracts. Now it was this, a fragile boy, a resilient man, and a mother rediscovering what mattered. Later that week, life's fragile balance tipped. It started with a phone call during dinner. Catherine nearly ignored it, but the name on the screen, Martin Caldwell, chairman of the board, made her stomach drop. She answered reluctantly. Martin? His voice was clipped, weary. Catherine, the investors are restless. They're questioning your leadership. Rumors are spreading that you're distracted. Her jaw tightened. Distracted? I'm still running numbers. Still closing deals. Not at the level they expect. Not at the level you built, Catherine. You've missed critical meetings. Clients notice. If this continues, the board will have no choice but to review your position. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. She had fought her way into this world, clawed her way to the top, shattering ceilings most thought unbreakable. And now, because she chose to show up for her son, they threatened to take it away. I understand, she said finally, voice raw. I'll figure out. When she hung up, her appetite vanished. Across the table, Ethan was happily devouring pie, unaware of the battle raging behind his mother's tired smile. Daniel, however, noticed. His gray eyes studied her, steady but concerned. Bad news? He asked quietly once Ethan skipped off to fetch a toy. The worst kind, Catherine admitted. If I don't prove myself soon, I could lose everything I built. Daniel leaned forward, his voice gentle but fierce. You won't lose what matters. Look at him. Ethan's laughter echoed from the hallway, fragile yet luminous. Catherine swallowed hard. But what if I lose both? The company and this? Daniel didn't answer right away. He let the silence speak, heavy and poignant. Finally, he said, sometimes the things we think we can't live without aren't the things that keep us alive. The truth of it pierced her like ice. A few days later, Catherine accompanied Ethan and Daniel to school for a fall recital. She had skipped these in the past, always sending a driver or an assistant with an excuse about an unmovable meeting. But this time, she sat in the second row, hands trembling, heart pounding with anticipation. Children filed onto the stage, costumes of leaves and pumpkins rustling. Ethan stood near the end, his crutches painted bright orange for the occasion. Daniel crouched backstage, giving him a thumbs up. The music began. Ethan lifted his arms, wobbling slightly, then found his balance. He didn't sing the loudest or move the most gracefully, but he stood, fiercely, proudly, for nearly the entire song. When the audience erupted in applause, Catherine rose to her feet, tears streaming freely. "That's my son," she shouted, clapping until her palms ached. Ethan's eyes found hers, luminous with joy. Afterward, he ran, or as close to running as his legs allowed, into her arms. "Did you see me, Mom? Did you really watch?" She kissed his damp hair, holding him so tight he squealed. "I saw everything, champ. You were perfect." Daniel joined them, his smile quiet but radiant. He was unstoppable. In that moment, Catherine felt something shift. The company, the board, the looming threats, they all seemed smaller, because what she had just witnessed wasn't measured in profit margins. It was measured in seconds of courage, in the fragile strength of a boy who refused to quit. But shadows lingered. That night, when the house was quiet, Catherine sat at her desk, staring at a reflection in the dark window. She was weary, torn between two worlds, one built on ambition, the other on love. Both demanded sacrifices. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Melissa, her old friend. Word is spreading fast. People say you're letting some janitor run your life. Careful, Catherine. Your reputation is on the line. Her fist clenched. Janitor. The word burned. Daniel wasn't just some janitor. He was resilient, steady, luminous in his quiet strength. He had given Ethan hope, and in doing so, given Catherine herself a second chance at being human. She deleted the message without replying. For the first time in years, she didn't care what the world whispered. 2 nights later, Catherine joined Daniel on the porch after Ethan had gone to bed. The autumn air was cool. The sky stretched wide with stars. You've changed everything, she said softly. Daniel looked startled. Me? Yes. You gave Ethan hope. And you reminded me what love looks like, what family feels like. For a long moment, silence hung between them, fragile and raw. Then Daniel said, I didn't do it alone. You're the one showing up now. You're the one choosing him over everything else. Her throat tightened. She wanted to say more, but the words felt dangerous, too luminous to speak aloud. Instead, she whispered, Thank you, Daniel, for not giving up on us. His eyes met hers, steady and unwavering. I never will. And as the night wrapped around them, Catherine realized that no matter what storm came, whether from the boardroom or the gossip mill, she had already found what mattered most. Thanksgiving week arrived, and with it, the tension Catherine had been quietly bracing for. Her company's annual shareholders meeting was scheduled for the day before the holiday, a meeting she had never once missed in her 15 years as CFO. This year, though, it collided with something far more fragile and luminous. Ethan's first attempt to walk across the living room without his crutches, time for the family's small Thanksgiving gathering. In years past, Catherine would have flown to New York without hesitation, leaving a nanny to manage the holiday. But now, the choice gnawed at her. The board expected her presence, fierce and commanding in her signature blazer. Ethan expected his mother, sitting on the couch, clapping with luminous pride. For days she was restless, pacing her office, torn between the two worlds. She was weary of living split down the middle. One night, while Ethan was asleep, she sat at the kitchen table with Daniel, pie crusts cooling on the counter. She finally whispered what had been circling in her mind. If I don't go to New York, they could strip me of everything. My title, my reputation, the company I built. Daniel studied her face, his voice steady but tender. And if you go, what do you lose here? Her throat tightened. She pictured Ethan, fragile but resilient, standing in the middle of the room, scanning the crowd for his mother. She imagined the light dimming in his eyes when she wasn't there. I'd lose him, she admitted rawly. Daniel reached across the table, his hand warm over hers. Then you already know your answer. The simplicity of his words struck her harder than any corporate ultimatum. The next morning, Catherine called her assistant. Cancel New York. I'll send Greg in my place. Her assistant's gasp was audible. Catherine, this is career suicide. Maybe, Catherine replied firmly. Or maybe it's the first sane decision I've made in years. When she hung up, she felt oddly light, as though she'd been carrying armor, so heavy it nearly crushed her. Thanksgiving morning dawned crisp and clear. The house, once sterile, now buzzed with life. Catherine's sister arrived with her kids. Daniel brought Lily, and neighbors trickled in carrying pies and casseroles. Laughter and the aroma of turkey filled every corner. Ethan sat in the center of the living room, crutches set aside, determination blazing across his small face. Mom, today's the day. You have to watch. I wouldn't miss it for the world, she said, her voice fierce and tender at once. Daniel knelt beside him, whispering encouragement. The room hushed as Ethan rose, his fragile legs trembling but resilient. One step, then another. Catherine's heart pounded in her ears. She counted silently, willing him forward. Around the fifth step, he faltered, nearly collapsing. Daniel steadied him, but Ethan shook his head, luminous with determination. "No, I can do it." He pushed forward, inch by inch, until he reached the couch where Catherine sat. When his small hands touched her knees, the room erupted in cheers. Catherine scooped him into her arms, sobbing into his hair. "You did it, champ. You really did it." Ethan's voice was muffled but proud. "I told you, teams don't quit." The words pierced her, raw and radiant. That night, after the guests left and Ethan fell asleep clutching his stuffed bear, Catherine stood on the porch with Daniel. The cold air stung, stars glittering sharp above them. "You gave him this," she whispered. Daniel shook his head. "He gave it to himself. I just reminded him he could." She turned to him, eyes luminous with gratitude. "You don't understand. I used to think success was about balance sheets and contracts. But today, watching him walk, I realized I've been chasing shadows. This is real." For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Catherine felt something fragile but undeniable stirring inside her, a hope she hadn't allowed herself in years. Daniel's gaze was steady, almost fierce. "You're not losing anything, Catherine. You're finally winning what matters." Her throat closed. She wanted to tell him how much his resilience, his tenderness, his presence had changed her. But the words stayed locked inside, too raw, too dangerous to name. Instead, she whispered, "Thank you, Daniel, for standing by us." He gave a quiet nod, the corners of his mouth lifting. "Always." The following Monday, Catherine returned to her desk, ready for the fallout. As expected, her inbox exploded with sharp messages. Martin Caldwell's email was the harshest. "Your absence was noted. The board is reconsidering your role. Prepare yourself." Her pulse quickened, fear clawing at her chest. But then she glanced at the photo on her desk. Ethan beaming. Daniel crouched beside him, both giving triumphant thumbs up after the Thanksgiving walk. And for the first time, Catherine didn't feel fragile. She felt fierce. She typed her reply slowly, deliberately. "I will not apologize for being a mother. I trust Greg handled the meeting well. If my leadership is measured only in hours at a conference table, then perhaps this isn't the place for me anymore." When she pressed send, she felt free. That evening, Catherine found Ethan drawing superheroes again. This time, there were 3 figures, a boy standing tall, a man with strong arms, and a woman with a cape. "Who's that?" she asked, pointing to the woman. "You," Ethan said without hesitation. "You're Supermom now." Her eyes blurred with tears. "Supermom, huh? That's the best title I've ever had." Ethan nodded fiercely. "Better than CFO." Catherine laughed, raw and luminous. He was right, and as she kissed his forehead, she knew she had crossed the threshold. The old Catherine, the weary executive who sacrificed everything for status, was gone. In her place stood someone new, a mother who had finally remembered what love, resilience, and family truly meant. Winter pressed down on Boston with a kind of raw intensity that left the sidewalk slick and the air biting. Catherine watched the first snow drift across her front lawn from the window of her home office, her laptop glowing with unread messages. Each one carried the same cold warning. The board's patience was running out. She knew her absence at the shareholders' meeting had shifted more than calendars. Whispers had turned into fierce debates. Old colleagues questioned her leadership. Some hinted she had lost her edge. For years, she had been resilient enough to silence critics with results. But now, her priorities had changed, and everyone knew it. Ethan, however, didn't. To him, the snow outside meant one thing: adventure. "Mom, Daniel, come look." His voice rang through the house, luminous with excitement. Catherine shut her laptop and hurried downstairs. Ethan was at the window, face pressed against the glass. "Can we go out? Please? I want to try walking in the snow." Daniel crouched beside him, adjusting the boy's crutches. Snow's a little tricky, champ. Slippery. But if we go slow, we can try. Catherine hesitated, worry coiling in her chest. Maybe it's too dangerous. But Ethan cut her off, fragile voice fierce with determination. I can do it, Mom. I want to feel like the other kids. The plea was raw, undeniable. Catherine glanced at Daniel, who gave a small nod. We'll stay close. He can handle it. Outside, the world was hushed beneath a blanket of white. Catherine wrapped Ethan in his thick parka, tugging gloves onto his small hands. Daniel steadied him as he planted his crutches into the snow for the first time. Step, wobble, step. Catherine held her breath with each fragile movement. Daniel coached calmly beside him. One foot in front of the other, buddy. Don't rush. Just trust yourself. Ethan's cheeks flushed red from the cold, but his eyes shone luminous with joy. He took 4 steps, then 5, before tumbling softly into the snow. Instead of crying, he laughed. It's cold, but I did it. Daniel scooped him up, brushing snow from his coat. Catherine knelt, hugging them both fiercely. In that moment, she was a weary executive with collapsing reputation. She was simply a mother, raw with pride. Later that evening, as the fire crackled in the hearth, Catherine found herself sitting beside Daniel on the couch. Ethan had fallen asleep upstairs, tuckered out from the snow adventure. You know, Daniel said quietly, I've seen a lot of kids fight hard, but Ethan, he's something else. He doesn't quit, no matter how fragile his body feels. Catherine smiled, weary but luminous. He gets that from you. You've given him something I couldn't. Hope. Daniel looked into the fire, his profile etched with quiet strength. Hope isn't something you give. It's something you show. And you're showing him now, Catherine. Don't sell yourself short. Her throat tightened. For weeks, she had been fighting an internal war, torn between fierce loyalty to her career and tender devotion to her son. And here was this man, resilient, steady, reminding her that she was already enough. But peace didn't last. The following Monday, Catherine received a call from Martin Caldwell. His voice was sharp, cold as the winter air. The board is moving forward with a review of your position. Unless you attend the emergency session next Friday in New York, your resignation will be requested. Catherine's grip on the phone tightened. Martin, I've given my life to this company, and that's why we gave you patience. But the investors no longer believe you're committed. You have one chance to prove otherwise. The line went dead, leaving her trembling. When she turned, Daniel was standing in the doorway, his expression raw with concern. You heard? She asked softly. He nodded. What are you going to do? Her voice cracked. If I go, I'll miss Ethan's therapy showcase at school. He's been waiting for me to be there. If I don't go, I lose the company. Daniel stepped closer, his gaze fierce. Then ask yourself, which loss will haunt you more? The question pierced deeper than any boardroom critique. Friday came faster than Catherine wanted. That morning, she stood at her closet, torn between her tailored blazer and a simple winter coat. The blazer meant New York, the board, saving her title. The coat meant Ethan, his fragile steps, his hopeful eyes searching for her in the school gym. Downstairs, Ethan was practicing in the hallway, Daniel at his side. Catherine watched unseen from the top of the stairs. Ethan's voice floated up. Do you think Mom will be proud when she sees me walk tomorrow? Of course, Daniel replied firmly. She already is. The words shattered her. She chose the coat. The next day, the school gym buzzed with families, cameras flashing, chatter echoing against the walls. Catherine sat in the front row, her hands clammy, her heart pounding. She ignored the buzzing of her phone in her purse. When Ethan stepped onto the gym floor, supported only by Daniel's steadying hand, the room hushed. He moved slowly, fragile legs trembling, but his determination was fierce. One step, then another. Come on, champ, Daniel whispered. Ethan's eyes locked on Catherine. Mom, watch me. Tears blurred her vision. She rose to her feet. I'm watching, baby. I'm right here. He made it halfway across the gym before collapsing into Daniel's arms. The crowd erupted in applause. Catherine rushed forward, kneeling beside them, hugging Ethan as if the world could end and she wouldn't let go. "You were perfect," she whispered fiercely. "Absolutely perfect." Ethan beamed, breathless but luminous. "I felt like a superhero." "You are one," Catherine said, her voice raw with pride. That evening, after putting Ethan to bed, Catherine sat by the fire with Daniel. Silence stretched between them, fragile and full of unspoken truths. "You risked everything today," Daniel said finally. She met his gaze, weary but resolute. "No, I saved everything that matters." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "You're stronger than you think, Catherine." For the first time, she believed it. As snow drifted softly outside, Catherine realized something profound. The board could strip her titles, colleagues could whisper, reputations could crumble, but none of that defined her anymore. She was a mother, luminous with love, resilient in ways she had never known, and, for the first time in her life, truly alive. The week after Ethan's school showcase, Catherine thought the storm might finally settle. She had chosen her son over the board, and for a fleeting moment, she believed the world would bend to that choice. But the business world was never tender. It was fierce, impatient, and unforgiving. By Monday morning, the headlines were out. CFO Harrison absent from crisis meeting. Company in unsteady hands. The articles were raw, slicing into her reputation like knives. Former colleagues called, their voices weary with disappointment. Some accused her of betrayal. Others whispered she had been replaced already. Catherine sat at the kitchen island, phone buzzing nonstop beside her untouched coffee. Ethan and Daniel were building a Lego tower in the living room, their laughter echoing through the house. She stared at them, luminous in their joy, and thought, what if I lose everything but them? Would that be enough? Her chest clenched with both fear and fragile hope. That evening, Daniel found her outside on the porch, snow crunching beneath his boots. "You've been quiet all day," he said gently. She exhaled, weary. "They're tearing me apart in the press. The board will move fast now. By next week, I may not have a job." Daniel leaned against the railing, his voice steady. "And how do you feel about that?" She hesitated, raw honesty pressing at her throat. Terrified, angry, but also free. "I'm not sure which is stronger." Daniel's gray eyes softened. "Freedom always comes with fear. But look at Ethan. He doesn't care about headlines. He cares that his mom is there when he takes a step." The simplicity of his words was luminous, cutting through her doubts. Midweek, another challenge arrived, this one closer to home. Ethan had been invited to a birthday party at a classmate's house. Catherine was nervous, uncertain how other children would react to his crutches and braces. But Ethan was insistent. "I want to go, Mom. I don't want to be left out." So Catherine took him, Daniel tagging along for support. The house buzzed with kids, balloons, and the smell of pizza. For a while, things were well. Ethan laughed, ate cake, played a board game. But when the kids ran to the backyard for a snowball fight, Ethan froze at the door. His fragile legs trembled, his crutches slipping on the icy patio. A few boys snickered. "He can't even keep up." Catherine's blood boiled. She started forward, but Daniel stopped her with a gentle hand. "Let him try first." Ethan gritted his teeth, fierce determination in his small frame. He planted his crutches, took a step, then another. He slipped once, nearly falling, but caught himself. By the time he made it to the middle of the yard, the laughter had stopped. The other kids stared, silent, as Ethan raised his arms. "Snowball fight," he shouted, luminous with pride. The yard erupted into chaos, and soon Ethan was laughing with the rest of them, his fragile legs forgotten. Catherine blinked back tears, her chest raw with pride. Later, on the drive home, Ethan leaned against her shoulder, exhausted but glowing. "Mom, I felt normal today, like one of them." Catherine kissed his hair, her voice trembling. "You're more than normal, champ. You're extraordinary." Daniel, driving, glanced at her in the rearview mirror. His quiet smile said everything words couldn't, but the board wasn't finished. On Friday, Martin Caldwell called again. His tone was clipped, fierce. "Catherine, the decision is nearly final. If you want any chance of keeping your position, you must attend Monday's emergency session in New York. No excuses this time. Catherine's pulse hammered. Monday. That was the same day Ethan's doctor had scheduled his 6-month progress evaluation, the day he was supposed to attempt walking across the clinic floor unaided. The cruel irony wasn't lost on her. She hung up and sat at the kitchen table, face buried in her hands. Daniel entered quietly, setting down a mug of tea. "You don't have to tell me," he said softly. "I can see it in your face." Her voice cracked. "I can't keep living like this, Daniel. Split in two. Every choice feels like betrayal. If I go to New York, I betray Ethan. If I stay, I betray the company I built from nothing." Daniel leaned forward, his voice raw but tender. "Catherine, the company doesn't love you back. Your son does. Which one are you really afraid to lose?" Tears slipped down her cheeks. She whispered, "I don't want him to ever feel second." "Then make sure he never does," Daniel said, his tone fierce with conviction. Monday arrived, gray and cold. Catherine woke before dawn, staring at the 2 outfits laid across her bed. The tailored blazer for New York, the simple sweater for the clinic. Downstairs, Ethan sat at the breakfast table, braces already strapped, eyes shining with nervous hope. "Mom, you'll be there, right? When I walk for Dr. Simmons." Her throat closed. She reached across the table, holding his small hand. "Yes, sweetheart, I'll be there. Nothing could keep me away." Daniel's eyes met hers, steady and luminous with approval. At that moment, Catherine knew she had chosen. The clinic smelled of antiseptic and faint coffee. Families filled the waiting area, children in wheelchairs, on walkers, each carrying their own battles. Ethan stood at the far end of the therapy room, crutches set aside. Daniel crouched nearby, ready to catch him if needed. Catherine sat on the edge of her seat, heart hammering. "Ready, champ?" Daniel asked. Ethan nodded fiercely. "Ready." He took one step, then another, fragile legs trembling, sweat beading on his forehead. The room was silent except for his uneven breaths. Catherine whispered each number under her breath, her voice trembling. 4, 5, 6. Halfway across the room, Ethan stumbled. Gasps echoed. Catherine nearly bolted forward, but Daniel steadied him. "You got this, buddy. Don't quit now." Ethan grit his teeth, luminous with sheer willpower. Step after shaky step, he moved forward until finally, unbelievably, he reached the other side. The room erupted in applause. Catherine rushed to him, scooping him into her arms, sobbing into his hair. "You did it," she whispered, voice raw. "My brave boy, you really did it." Ethan clung to her, his voice muffled but radiant. "I told you, Mom. Teams don't quit." That night, Catherine's phone buzzed again. Another message from Martin Caldwell. "Since you chose not to attend, the board will move forward without you. Effective immediately, your role is under review." She read it once, then set the phone aside. Daniel was on the porch, staring at the snowy street. Catherine joined him, wrapping her coat tighter. "It's over," she said quietly. He turned to her, his voice steady. "No, it's just beginning. You may lose a title, Catherine, but you've already found something more resilient, more luminous than any title could give." She looked back toward the house, where Ethan was laughing in his room, his voice carrying down the hall like music. And she realized Daniel was right. For the first time in her life, she wasn't defined by what she built, but by who she stood beside. By the time December settled in, the Harrison house looked different. Warmer, lived in, alive. Pine garlands draped across the staircase. The smell of cinnamon candles lingered in the air, and Ethan's drawings decorated the refrigerator. Superheroes, snowmen, and one sketch of 3 stick figures holding hands labeled Team Forever. But outside those walls, Catherine's world was shifting. The board's decision to review her role had spread across the financial press like wildfire. Headlines painted her as fragile, distracted, even irresponsible. Former allies kept their distance. Some friends didn't return calls. The Catherine who once commanded boardrooms with a fierce voice and unshakable presence was now portrayed as a cautionary tale. She should have felt defeated, Instead, she felt weary, yes, but also strangely free. Because every morning, when Ethan pushed himself one step farther, when Daniel's steady encouragement filled the house, she knew she had chosen the luminous path, the one that mattered. One icy afternoon, Catherine bundled Ethan into the car for a holiday therapy session. Snowflakes drifted across the windshield, the road slick with slush. Daniel drove, focused with calm, his strong hand steady on the wheel. Ethan chattered from the back seat, his voice bright. "Mom, can we get a Christmas tree tonight? A real one, not the fake one in the attic." Catherine turned in her seat, smiling tenderly. "Of course. We'll go to the tree farm after your appointment." Daniel grinned. "Better bring gloves." Cutting a tree isn't exactly a boardroom activity. She rolled her eyes, laughing softly. "You underestimate me. I've handled tougher negotiations." The banter eased her nerves, but beneath the laughter lay tension. At the clinic, Dr. Simmons confirmed Ethan's progress was resilient and extraordinary. With continued therapy, I believe he'll be walking short distances independently within a year. Catherine's chest tightened, tears stinging her eyes. "Thank you, doctor. That means more than I can put into words." Ethan beamed, fragile but luminous. "See, Mom? I told you I'd do it." That night, the three of them stood in the cold at a local tree farm, the air filled with the scent of pine and wood smoke. Ethan chose a slightly crooked tree, insisting it had character. Daniel carried it on his shoulder, muscles taut, while Catherine laughed, brushing snowflakes from her coat. At home, they decorated together, ornaments glinting in the firelight, Ethan balancing carefully to hang his favorite star near the top. For the first time in years, the house felt less like a museum and more like a home. Later, after Ethan went to bed, Catherine lingered by the tree with Daniel. The glow of the lights painted his face tender, raw in its simplicity. "You know," she whispered, "I used to think Christmas was just another distraction from work. But now, this feels luminous, like I'm finally seeing what I missed all these years." Daniel's gaze met hers, steady and fierce. "You didn't miss it forever. You're here now, and that's what Ethan will remember." Her chest ached with gratitude. She wanted to say more, wanted to name the feelings that had been building between them, fragile but undeniable. But fear kept the words locked inside. A few days later, the storm she'd been expecting hit. Martin Caldwell called with the final decision. "Catherine, the board has voted. Your role as CFO is terminated, effective immediately." The words echoed in her ears, sharp and merciless. For 15 years, she had given everything to that company. And now, in a single breath, it was gone. When she hung up, she sat motionless at the kitchen table, staring at the mug in her hands. Her fingers trembled. The woman who once stood at the top of the corporate world now felt fragile, stripped bare. Daniel entered quietly, reading her face before she spoke. "It's done," she whispered, voice raw. "They took it all." He pulled out a chair, sitting across from her. "Not all." Her eyes filled with tears. "Daniel, I don't even know who I am without that job." He reached across the table, his voice steady, resilient. "You're a mother. You're the woman who gave her son hope when he needed it most. You're stronger now than you ever were in that office." The truth in his words was poignant, piercing through the haze of loss. For the first time, Catherine allowed herself to cry openly. Not the silent tears of a weary executive, but the raw sobs of a woman finally letting go. Daniel didn't try to stop her. He simply stayed, his hand warm over hers, steady as a promise. That weekend, Catherine took Ethan to see the Boston Common lights. Families crowded the park, music filled the air, and the city sparkled with holiday cheer. Ethan clutched her hand, luminous with wonder. "Mom, it's beautiful," he whispered. "Yes, champ, it is." She squeezed his hand, fragile but firm. "And so are you." Daniel walked beside them, his presence quiet but grounding. For the first time, Catherine wasn't thinking about what she had lost. She was thinking about what she was building, raw, imperfect, but real. When they returned home, Ethan darted upstairs to grab a toy, leaving Catherine and Daniel alone by the glowing tree. Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken feelings. Finally, Catherine whispered. "I don't know what comes next, but I know I don't want to face it alone." Daniel's gaze was fierce, unwavering. "You won't. Not as long as I'm here." Something fragile cracked open in her chest. A flicker of hope, luminous and undeniable. That night, as snow fell softly outside, Catherine tucked Ethan into bed. He looked up at her, eyes heavy with sleep. "Mom, are you happy?" he asked. The question struck her raw, sharper than any headline or boardroom loss. She leaned down, kissing his forehead. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm happier than I've been in a long, long time." As she turned out the light, Catherine realized the truth. She might have lost her title, her reputation in the corporate world, but she had gained something fierce and unshakable. Love, family, a future luminous with possibility. And for the first time in her life, she was ready to embrace it. The new year arrived quietly, without the usual champagne toasts or gala events that had once defined Catherine's Decembers. Instead, she and Ethan stood in their driveway, bundled in coats, watching fireworks blossom across the Boston skyline from a distance. Daniel and Lily were with them, their breath rising in frosty clouds. "Mom," Ethan whispered, clutching her hand, "this year, I'm going to run." Catherine knelt, meeting his luminous eyes. "And I'll be right here, cheering you on every step." For the first time in her life, she meant it with every raw fiber of her being. The weeks that followed were tender but unsteady. Catherine was no longer CFO. The world she had once commanded didn't just shut its doors, it slammed them. Former colleagues avoided her at coffee shops. Magazines that once praised her resilience now framed her as a cautionary tale. But while her professional life lay in ruins, her personal world blossomed. Ethan's progress was undeniable. With Daniel's patient guidance, he began walking across short distances in the living room without crutches, each fragile step more radiant than the last. Catherine clapped until her palms stung, tears streaming, her heart fierce with pride. One evening, after Ethan had proudly crossed from the kitchen table to the couch, Catherine whispered to Daniel, This is the most luminous victory I've ever witnessed, bigger than any contract I ever signed." Daniel's steady smile warmed her. "Because it's real." By February, Catherine had started something new. Not a corporation, not a financial empire, but a foundation. The Harrison Family Initiative, dedicated to supporting children with mobility challenges and single parents struggling to afford therapy. "I spent years building wealth for strangers," she explained at the modest launch event held in a local community center. "Now, I want to build hope for families." The applause was gentle but heartfelt. For the first time, Catherine wasn't chasing prestige. She was planning something resilient and lasting. One Saturday, the four of them, Catherine, Ethan, Daniel, and Lily, visited the park by the Charles River. Snow was melting, the first fragile hints of spring in the air. Ethan insisted on trying the walking path again. He steadied himself, Daniel at his side. Catherine watching with her breath caught in her throat. Step after step, Ethan moved forward, his legs trembling but determined. By the time he reached the halfway point without falling, strangers on the path began clapping. Catherine's chest swelled. She shouted, fierce and joyful, "That's my boy!" Ethan grinned, luminous, and whispered breathlessly, "I did it, Mom." She swept him into her arms, raw tears of joy streaming. "Yes, champ, you did it." Daniel stood close, his steady presence grounding her as the moment washed over them all. That night, after the kids were asleep, Catherine and Daniel sat by the fireplace. The silence between them was no longer fragile. It was warm, steady, filled with unspoken truths. "You've changed everything," Catherine said softly. "Not just for Ethan, for me too. You reminded me of what it means to live." Daniel's gaze held hers, fierce and tender. "And you reminded me that love doesn't end with loss. It grows when you let it." Her heart thudded. For months, she had felt the slow, undeniable pull toward him. Now, sitting in the glow of the fire, she let herself whisper the truth. "Daniel, I don't want to do this life without you." He reached for her hand, his touch steady and luminous. "Then you'll never have to." Spring unfolded like a promise. The Harrison home, once sterile, now thrummed with life. Pancake breakfasts, Lego battles, therapy victories, and evenings filled with laughter. Ethan's braces grew lighter, his steps steadier. Lily spent weekends sketching with Catherine, their bond tender and real. And Daniel, no longer just an employee, became something more. A partner, a friend, a fierce and resilient anchor. One evening in April, as the family gathered in the backyard, Catherine looked around and felt something she had never known before. Peace. Not the weary silence of an empty house, but the luminous calm of a life rebuilt on love. The world still whispered about Catherine Harrison, the fallen CFO, but she no longer cared, because in this house, she was something infinitely greater. A mother, a woman who had chosen her son over status, love over fear, life over titles. As she watched Ethan chase fireflies across the grass, his fragile legs now steady enough to keep up, she realized this was her legacy. Not spreadsheets, not headlines, but a boy who believed he could do the impossible because his mom never stopped believing in him. And so, her story came full circle. Catherine Grace Harrison had once thought success meant never pausing, never yielding, never letting her armor crack. But it was in the raw cracks, in the weary nights, the tender mornings, the fierce love of a fragile child, that she found what truly mattered. Ethan's laughter rang out, luminous against the twilight. Daniel's steady presence wrapped around her like a promise. And Catherine smiled, knowing she had finally built the only empire worth fighting for. Family,